So Valerie, thank you for joining us today at the FPA booth here at Concordia.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It is a pleasure to meet you as a fellow filmmaker colleague. I was very intrigued by your pedigree all the way through, and really I want to come back to your platform, your social venture circle, of course, but so much of your life coming from investment banking, the filmmaking, which of course I always say is a form of investment banking, and of course your work at large. I really want to talk about each one of those just briefly.
Well, I have been very blessed, of course, to have some amazing careers working on amazing projects in both film and finance as a filmmaker and an investment banker. And I think what I've brought from that experience from filmmaking is this incredible connection to storytelling. And that comes not just from my experience starting back at UCLA as a film student and learning the art, but then also my heritage of being Native American and understanding from my community and my people that oral history and oral storytelling is so important to convey messages, important messages to our future generations. So I've always been really, really attached to the idea of storytelling in all forms. And so coming from that experience and having a 20-year history of producing and directing films with an amazing executive producer in Gail Ann Hurd, you know, the one thing we kept hitting against was no lack of amazing stories, no lack of amazing talent, but financing always is an issue in the entertainment industry for good stories that might not have commercial value. They might be more community-based. And then as an investment banker, almost 100% of my focus was access to capital for tribal communities and Native American businesses, and trying to bridge the gap of a lot of misunderstanding between Wall Street and your traditional funding sources, and finding ways of integrated capital that made it not so extractive. And so you kind of come back to that whole question of finance, and I think a lot of the discussion here today has to do with shareholder value versus sustainability and the practices that we all want to see going forward, and yet there's sort of this imbalance. And so I feel like all of those experiences really have helped me to be in a position where I am now to really understand challenges around finance and hopefully solutions around finance.
Well, let's talk specifically about the platform of Social Venture Circle and what it really does in a nutshell.
Well, I'm just so honored and blessed to be the executive director of Social Venture Circle. Last year actually merged between two of the oldest nonprofits in the social impact space. Some people refer to our space as sustainability and corporate responsibility. There's lots of different terminology, but Social Venture Network, our sort of parent organization, was started in 1987. So the folks in our network have been at this for 4 decades. And it merged last year with Investor Circle, which is an organization that had spun out of SVN with a focus on the facilitation of capital into impact businesses. So together, we have a global network. We focus on a lot of different practices for businesses in the social impact space, not just capital, but a lot of it is around finance and what we call patient capital, less extractive structuring, term sheets that make sense for both parties, but also scaling. How do you scale and retain your impact? Working with larger companies and integrating sustainability practices into those companies. We have a network of support and peer circles. And what excites me a lot is we have pitch events where we help flow capital into new and innovative companies. So the young entrepreneurs that are really aiming at innovative solutions in their business to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So we're seeing really interesting technology and AI plays around recycling and reducing waste and plastics and carbon footprint. You know, so there's some really exciting things that I get to do every single day.
That is exciting, and you talk and address so much about the next generation of economy, right? The next economy. And we hear so much about that, especially with the 2030 agenda from the UN. Talk about how you've been really able to exercise that and empower a lot of these young business minds.
Absolutely. So our tagline at Social Venture Circle is, in fact, welcome to the next economy, one that is regenerative, prosperous, and equitable for all. And that's in business. You know, we're primarily focused on business. We are a nonprofit, but we don't actively work with philanthropic ventures. We work with for-profit businesses. And our whole principles are based on more than sustainability, actually. Sustainability, if you look it up, that definition is not depleting the resources that you're currently using for the next generation. So just keeping things, you know, at an even keel, and that's okay, because we haven't done that. You know, we have depleted the resources. Regenerative business actually improves the world, so you're leaving it in a better place for the next generations, and that's what we want to see. So not just making sure that you're not contributing to the carbon footprint, but are you reducing it? Not just putting an end to human trafficking, but are you now helping those victims get reintegrated into the workforce or back into school? You know, so we look at going that step beyond and really helping and empowering our companies in a business model that can be profitable and bring value to employees and shareholders and investors, but also really regenerative.
Well, I also love it too because it's such a representative of community, really, right? Both the platform itself and the focus of everything you do, but also that very deliberate action, if you would, of. Are we good, by the way? Okay, sorry. I'll just reframe that. We saw someone walk right through the frame. So, but I love it that also it's very, I would say, very community driven. It's your platform itself and everything you do is very much about a community resource and maybe even perhaps a community, someone who understands and delivers message across platforms and across audiences, but also that giving back on the next generation of income, keeping the community, the next generation, being that ante, as it were, as we were talking earlier, to somebody else in the next generation.
Absolutely. And, you know, in line with my storytelling background, I love to tell the story of one of our most famous case studies from our network, which is Ben & Jerry's. And a lot of people think of Ben & Jerry's simply as a very tasty ice cream. But when you look at their history, they started very much as a community company in Vermont. I think they started in a garage or a very small place. And started to scale, and they were committed to employee benefits, equal pay for their employees, and a commitment to the community and philanthropy. Everything was biodegradable in terms of their containers, way before anyone was talking about that. Organic, you know, really healthy products in their ice cream. But then they have a partnership with Grayston Bakery, which provides all of their baked goods. So if you've eaten the ice cream, you know there's a lot of cookies and brownies and other sort of wonderful things that go into it.
Unfortunately, I don't know it too well.
It's a favorite in my family as well. But at Grayston Bakery, they actually have open hiring, no application, mostly formerly incarcerated. So now you see Ben & Jerry's moving from just being a sort of sustainable, responsible company to an impactful company where they were really impacting that whole community around Grayston Bakery, which was in New York. And then when they eventually were purchased by Unilever, which is a $60 billion multinational entity, they had this positive Trojan horse effect where now you see Unilever is really leading some efforts around sustainable and regenerative practices because of companies like Ben & Jerry's. They also purchased 7 Generation, which is another one of our legacy companies. And so when we tell that story, you see community actually being carried through and influencing areas of corporations that you wouldn't normally think of community, but that's the stories we love.
Well, I also want to go back to your roots, your heritage, coming from the Cherokee Nation, I believe, as well. And so much of that, of course, is about community, also respecting traditions, tribal elders, a real protocol, if you would, that in some ways we may have lost and got disconnected from, not just from a Native American viewpoint, but as a globe in general. Can you talk to that a bit?
Absolutely. So my father was Cherokee Heritage, born in and around Tahlequah, Oklahoma, where the Cherokee Nation is based. I actually was born and raised in California because he was brought out on what's called a relocation program. It was a government program. It was not positive for many of our American Indians, but what it did in terms of my family, I wasn't able to grow up with my people. So I am Cherokee, but I had to kind of find my roots later in life. And now I've worked with the Cherokee Nation. I just did a film called Man Killer about their first female principal chief. But in terms of my own journey, I decided, together with my husband, who's German, that we would work almost entirely in our professional life with tribal nations. And so we've worked with about 110 different tribes in terms of helping them with economic development and raising capital and making films. And so we've been able to really get a sense of different cultures, because we're not all homogenous. There's 562 different tribes in America. And I've had this wonderful lesson and deep appreciation for the different cultures, the different history, the different stories. One of the tribes I'm working with now even is Tulalip. They're the salmon people up in the Northwest, and I knew nothing about their culture, as a Cherokee woman. So there's so much rich history, and yet over and over again, we would see that access to capital and economic development was an impediment to continuing the traditions and the history and teaching their children the language, because you need money to build infrastructure for education, and you need social programs. And so now that we have some economic development through gaming and actually an expansion beyond that, we are finally seeing that we're able to really restore things like cultural museums and language programs with elders from the tribe teaching the next generation. So it's a story that continues, and I think it's a good one, but we still have a lot of need in our tribal communities for access to capital, partnerships, and economic development.
And just going back to a sustainable funding platform as well, for so long it was thought that, well, I could either invest smartly and wisely and good for the world, or I could make a profit. And now I think we're beginning to finally understand, both as investors and also as entrepreneurs, no, there's no boundaries there. Address that.
Well, and actually we have people in our network and companies that actually have the data to show that investing into companies, whether it be small companies in an individual portfolio or in your retirement fund on a very large publicly traded way, you actually can beat the benchmarks, because ESG, environmental, social, and governance, stands for a lot more than just one vertical. When you have a company that's committed to ESG practices, that governance piece is so important. And any investor really knows that the key to a good, successful company is management. And if your management is handling their governance in a way that is good for their employees, that is good for the world around them, typically you're going to see a well-performed company. And so just top to bottom, we are seeing ESG investing, social impact investing actually brings around higher returns, beats a lot of the benchmarks. The problem is it's not always quick. The stereotype that we have to fight is the venture capital model that became so popular out of Silicon Valley, where I live, the unicorns, and you have a company that's a tech company that makes a 10 times return in 2 years. That's not the norm. And so we have to educate around patient capital and what a true return is on that triple bottom line. And we think we're getting there, but we still have a lot of education, because there's a lot of misinformation out there as well.
Well, we're also so focused right now on the UN agenda, the 2030 agenda. As someone who is working with so many different companies, so many different causes, so many entrepreneurs, are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic as we go into just 10 years from the goal?
I'm optimistic, but I think we have to really think about strategic partnerships. There's been a lot of discussion here at Concordia this week about that, because what we find is when you think about the UN goals, and those goals are mirroring a lot of individual corporate goals and individual people's goals, you can't do it alone. You can't do it in silos, and it takes philanthropy, working together with corporates, working together with policymakers, and the best programs really have to be a combined collaborative effort. And I'll give you an example. If you think about recycling in the US, imagine if each company like Coca-Cola or Pepsi had to be in charge of their cans or their recycling program. It took the companies meeting with policy makers, as well as the technology around how does it get recycled, so that now I am told I have to recycle or the city won't pick up my trash. My husband and I actually got a little notice that we had done something wrong, and so they weren't going to pick up but I like that. But that was a collaborative effort. We're not there with everything that needs to happen, and we can't just have one or two companies that are committed to some of these changes and some of these goals saying we want to lead this effort. We need everyone at the table. And at SVC, we feel that is part of our role, is getting everyone in the room to move things forward. We're facilitators, and we think that will be the key to reaching those goals, really, is collaboration, teamwork.
It is about teamwork. Valerie, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for all the fine work you're doing at Social Venture Circle.
Thank you.